The widow left at night so no one would see her go. Consuelo Vargas wrapped the baby in the patched blanket, put what little remained into a canvas sack, and closed the door of the house that was no longer hers without making a sound. Because if her brothers-in-law heard her leave, they would follow her, and she needed no one to follow. Welcome to Stories Between Lives. The cold of the Chiapas Sierra is not the same cold as the lowlands. It is a cold with weight, with damp inside it, that comes in through the nose and settles in the chest as if it meant to stay forever. Consuelo had known it since she was little, since she lived with her mother in a hut on the outskirts of San Cristobal, before Rodrigo Peñalosa took her to live with his family in the town of Teopisca, and everything seemed about to get better. It didn't get better, or it got better for a while, which is not the same thing. Rodrigo Peñalosa died in November from a fall off his horse in the ravine of the northern boundary. They found him the next day. Consuelo was 26 years old and had a 4-month-old baby named Mateo, who still didn't know that the world could be cruel as well as cold. What came after Rodrigo's death was quick and orderly, the way cruelties usually are when they've been planned for a long time. Rodrigo's brothers, Gilberto and Amador Peñalosa, arrived at the house 3 days after the burial with a paper they said was the original deed to the property. Gilberto was the older, a man of few words and many decisions, and he set the paper on the dining table with the calm of someone who already knows he has won. Amador spoke for both of them. He said the house and the land had always belonged to the Peñalosa family, that Rodrigo had never put a deed in Consuelo's name, that a woman alone with a newborn couldn't manage that anyway, and that the most sensible thing was for her to gather her things and leave before the matter got difficult. "It's better this way for everyone," said Amador, in that voice some men use when they believe a kind tone erases the cruelty of the words. "You'll understand." A neighbor who was present, Doña Pilar, looked at the tablecloth and said nothing. Consuelo didn't cry. She looked at Gilberto, who hadn't lifted his eyes from the paper. She looked at Amador, who was waiting for an answer. Then she looked at Mateo, who was sleeping in the basket beside the wood stove, with that absolute peace of those who don't yet know. She picked up the boy, held him to her chest, and said in a quiet voice, "I need 3 days." They gave her 2. On the second day, Consuelo Vargas left the house in Teopisca with the baby strapped to her body in the worn shawl, the canvas sack with whatever would fit, and her sandals tied tight because she knew she would walk a long way. She had nowhere precise to go. She had a direction, which is different. Her mother had died 2 years earlier, but had spoken to her once of a cabin in the Sierra that had belonged to her maternal family, the Cuevas, and that had been empty for years. She had told her once, on an unremarkable afternoon that Consuelo hadn't known at the time she would need to remember, "If you ever have nowhere, daughter, go up the Sierra by the road of the Double Cypress. There's a cabin there that still knows who we are." Consuelo didn't know if the cabin still existed. She didn't know if the road of the Double Cypress was real or one of those things old people's memory makes lovelier with time. But she had no other direction, and walking towards something uncertain is better than staying inside the certain thing that destroys you. She walked the first day along the dirt road, with Mateo asleep in the shawl and the sack hitting her hip. She stopped twice to nurse the boy, sitting on a stone by the road, with the Chiapas mountain opening above her in layers of green and mist. A woman passing on a donkey loaded with firewood looked at her, stopped, and without saying a word handed her a folded tortilla with beans that she pulled from her apron. Consuelo took it. She ate it walking. The second day it rained from dawn, the fine rain of the Sierra, the kind that doesn't soak you all at once but slowly drenches everything, without hurry, with an insistence that has no remedy. Consuelo took shelter under a stone overhang she found by the road, and waited 2 hours with Mateo pressed against her chest, singing him things in a low voice that had no words, just sound, whatever kept the boy calm, and her too. When the rain eased, she went on walking with her clothes damp and her feet twice as heavy. That night she slept under a large tree, with the sack as a pillow and the shawl stretched over Mateo as a roof. She didn't sleep well, but she didn't give up either, which isn't the same as sleeping well but resembles it in some way. On the third day, she found the Double Cypress. They were 2 trees grown so close together at the base that they seemed like one tree split down the middle, both old, with wrinkled bark and roots lifting the earth of the path. Consuelo recognized them without having seen them before. in the same way that one recognizes things that someone who loved you described with enough love. She turned onto the trail that came out between the two trunks and climbed for another half-hour up a path the woods had nearly swallowed. And then the cabin appeared. It was small, of stone and pine wood, with a tin roof that someone had repaired at some point, because not all of the tin was from the same era. It had a wooden door with an iron latch that wasn't fastened, a window with panes opaque from dust and cobwebs, and a narrow corridor with two wooden chairs that time had turned gray. Around it the forest grew with that disorderly generosity of the Chiapas Sierra, ferns, mosses, an old orange tree against the back wall that still had small green fruits on its branches. Consuelo pushed the door open. She went in. The inside smelled of damp wood and earth, and something else, something she couldn't name in that moment, but that she recognized as the absence of danger. There was a wood stove in the corner, a narrow bed with a straw mattress covered by a plastic sheet someone had placed to protect it, a rough wooden table with two benches, and on the back wall, hanging from a rusty nail, a navy blue wool shawl with fringed edges that she recognized immediately even though she had never seen it worn. It was her mother's shawl. She stood in front of it for an amount of time she couldn't count. Then she took it down with both hands, pressed it against her face, and for the first time since Rodrigo died, she cried for real, with her whole body, with the baby still strapped to her chest, who woke from the trembling and looked at her with those black, wide-open eyes, understanding nothing and understanding everything. What she didn't yet know was that the cabin was not as alone as it seemed. The next day, with the morning still cold and the orange tree dripping dew, she heard footsteps on the path. She picked up Mateo and stayed still beside the window, looking through the cloudy glass, until she saw a woman of about 70 appear, carrying a basket, climbing the trail with a slow but sure step, like someone who knows the path well. The woman reached the corridor, saw the open door, and instead of being surprised, simply said, "Ah, you've arrived." Her name was Dolores Cuevas. She explained to Consuelo, the two of them sitting on the wooden benches with a jug of Yerba Santa tea that Dolores had brought in the basket, that she was a second cousin of her mother's, that she had looked after the cabin since the Cuevas family began scattering around the world, and that every so often she came up to sweep, to check the roof, to oil the door hinge so it wouldn't seize. "Did my mother ask you to take care of it?" asked Consuelo. Dolores looked at her with those eyes of someone who has kept things for years. "Your mother asked me several things before she died. This was one of them." "What were the others?" Dolores set the jug on the table. She reached into the basket and pulled out a cloth bag closed with a knot. She placed it in front of Consuelo. "That I give you this when you arrived," she said. "Your mother said you would come. She couldn't tell me when, but she said you would come." Inside the bag was a thick paper envelope, folded in quarters with Consuelo's name written in her mother's hand. That round, tight handwriting Consuelo would have recognized anywhere. And beneath the envelope, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a notarized deed with the official seal of the municipality of San Cristobal de las Casas, dated 5 years earlier, in which Esperanza Vargas de Cuevas, Consuelo's mother, declared that the cabin in the Sierra and the half-hectare of land surrounding it were the property of her daughter, Consuelo Vargas, registered in the municipal land registry with a file number noted in the margin in blue ink. The deed had 2 witnesses. Dolores Cuevas was one of them. Consuelo read the document without letting go of Mateo, who had fallen back asleep against her shoulder with that absolute trust of one who doesn't yet know there are reasons not to trust. She read it twice. Then she read her mother's letter, which was longer and which won't be repeated here because there are words that belong only to the person who receives them. But it ended with a sentence Consuelo read 3 times in a row. "This place knows you, daughter. It was mine before it was yours, and now it is yours before you know it. The Sierra keeps what you entrust to it." Something inside her chest stopped hurting. "How long have you known I had this?" Consuelo asked without lifting her eyes from the paper. "Since your mother gave it to me to keep, 5 years ago." "And if I hadn't come?" Dolores picked up her jug. "Your mother said that wasn't going to happen." 12 days passed before Gilberto and Amador Peñalosa appeared. They arrived on a Tuesday morning, walking up the path of the double cypress with the visible effort of town men who aren't used to the altitude of the Sierra. Gilberto arrived first, breathing hard, with the expression of someone who has had to do something he hadn't planned. Amador came behind, with a folder under his arm and his argument prepared. They found Consuelo in the corridor mending a stocking with a bone needle, with Mateo asleep in the wooden crate Dolores had brought, now turned into a cradle and lined with cloth. She didn't get up when she saw them arrive. Amador spoke first, in that soft voice of well-dressed cruelties. "We know you found something here. But you must understand that a paper from your mother doesn't change what Rodrigo never gave you. The Peñalosa family has interests in this area too. It would be better if we spoke as reasonable people." Gilberto said nothing. He looked at the cabin, the stone walls, the orange tree at the back. He calculated. Dolores Cuevas then came out from inside the cabin with the step of a woman of 70 who knows well where she puts her feet. She stood beside Consuelo without saying anything, hands folded over her apron, and looked at them. Then she spoke with a voice that didn't need volume to carry far. "This property has been registered in the San Cristobal Land Registry under the name of Consuelo Vargas for 5 years. I am a witness to the document, and the deed has a file number. The Cuevas family has known these lands since before the town of Teopisca existed. If you have a legal dispute, the notary Fuentes in San Cristobal can attend to you any day of the week." Amador opened his mouth. "Whatever Rodrigo Peñalosa did or didn't give this woman has nothing to do with what her mother left her," Dolores continued. "They are separate things, and the second one you do not touch." Consuelo looked at them then, with her feet firm on the wooden floor of the corridor, with the bone needles still in her hand, and said in a calm voice, without hurrying, "I asked you for nothing when Rodrigo was alive. I'm not going to ask you for anything now. I didn't come here to fight with anyone. I came to where I belong. You can go." Now, Gilberto Peñalosa looked at his brother. Amador looked at the folder under his arm. He gripped it tighter. Then he turned around and began walking back down the path without saying another word. Gilberto followed. The forest swallowed them slowly, between the ferns and the mist of the Sierra, until their footsteps could no longer be heard. Dolores sat down in her chair on the corridor and picked up the jug of tea she had left on the bench. She said nothing for a while, then she murmured something that sounded like a prayer and crossed herself calmly. "Loyalty is not inherited by blood. It is inherited by presence, by care, by the doors someone leaves unlatched so you can come in when you most need to." By the time the heavy June rains arrived in the Chiapas Sierra, the Cuevas cabin had smoke coming out of the chimney from early in the morning, and the smell of clay pot coffee drifted down the path, all the way to the road of the Double Cypress. Consuelo had learned to light the wood stove with the damp wood of the Sierra, which is harder than with dry wood and requires patience in blowing. And Dolores had taught her over 3 consecutive mornings, with that pedagogy of old women who don't explain, but show and wait. The orange tree at the back gave fruit in May, small and tart and perfect, and Consuelo made jam from them, which she kept in glass jars that Dolores brought along with sugar and cinnamon. The first time the jam came out right, with that dark orange color and that smell that filled the whole cabin. Consuelo stood in front of the pot for a long moment, doing nothing, just looking at it, thinking of her mother who had also known how to make orange jam and had never taught her because there hadn't been enough time. Mateo grew with the sounds of the mountain, the dawn birds, the wind in the pines, the rain on the tin roof that sometimes sounded loud and sometimes soft depending which side it came from. Dolores carried him when Consuelo needed her hands free, and the boy led her with that trust babies have for arms that smell of something familiar. Don Esteban, Dolores' husband, came up every 2 weeks with the mule loaded with provisions and checked the roof and the door hinge and the state of the orange tree with the seriousness of a man who looks after what matters to him without anyone asking. One Sunday in July, they went down to Mass in the town of Las Margaritas, the closest to the Sierra, and people looked at them with a contained curiosity of towns that know everything but ask little. After Mass, 3 women approached Consuelo without formal introduction and offered her things. One a jar of honey, another some dried chiles, the third a root plant for the corridor, which according to her kept bad intentions away. Consuelo accepted them all. On the way back, with Mateo asleep in his grandmother's navy blue shawl and the mountain opening up above them in the afternoon, Dolores walked for a while in silence and then said without turning to look at her, "Your mother would have been glad." Consuelo didn't answer right away. She looked at the path, the cypresses, the mist that was beginning to come down from the hill with that slowness of things that aren't in a hurry because they know they're going to arrive anyway. I think she is, she said. Sometimes life pushes us toward a place we didn't ask for, down a road we didn't choose, with a weight we thought we couldn't carry. And it turns out that place was already waiting for us, that someone who loved us left it ready before they went, and the only thing we had to do was keep walking until we found it. Consuelo Vargas walked for 3 days with her child in her arms and found what her mother had kept for her with more faith than she herself had in that moment. That is not stolen. That is not canceled. That waits. Has someone ever believed in you just when you were beginning to doubt your own worth? If this story touched something in your heart, leave your comment below. Tell us what part of Mexico or where in the world you're watching from today. Subscribe to the Stories Between Lives channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single story. Share this story with someone who needs to know that there are places in the world that are waiting for you, even though you don't know them yet. Until the next story, a hug from heart to heart. We're staying here, Mateo, Consuelo told the boy that night as she rocked him beside the window with her mother's blue shawl over them both. This place knew us before we arrived.